Coyote Gulch by Peter Field, read by Mr. Stuff and Such. Introduction. Perhaps he was a little less colorful than the carefree, roaming cowboy. We sometimes overlook other figures that is also part and parcel of the history and the legend of the western United States. That figure is the settler, the homestead, the squatter, the nester, to call him at once by several names that have been assigned to him. The man who came west with his family to work the land and establish a home by sweat and sinew. Homesteading in the West became a major development after the war between the states, with the discharge of the soldiers from the armies. Under then existing laws, any man who had seen military service and was head of a family might acquire title to 160 acres of unappropriated land by residing on it and cultivating it for 5 years. An alternative was residing on the land for 6 months and paying $1.25 per acre. Thousands of men availed themselves of this opportunity. Other settlers went west in more precarious circumstances. They, their wives and children, ventured into the wide open spaces without the protection of the homestead laws and merely settled upon a likely bit of acreage. These are the ones to whom the terms squatter and nester was usually applied, and if the land they chose happened to be a part of the range on which an established rancher was running cows, they were often in trouble. In the long view, the settlers had the right of it, because without them in the West, with its large populated and cultivated areas as we know it today, would not have become a thing. But the average rancher, seeing his economy threatened by this influx of humanity, was often in a mood to start throwing lead. Many a fierce and bloody feud was fought out between the individual ranchers and the settlers. And such a feud, in fact, is the basis of Peter Field's Coyote Gulch, my present selection for the AAA Western Classic Series. As always, Peter Field has written a story with true Western flavor, flaming with action and swift moving intents. Coyote Gulch, Chapter 1. Bushwhacked. A pony scuttled hastily over the brow of a wooden butte and dashed headlong down the other side. He scrambled with a frantic eagerness on the steep, rain-washed hillside, his white and brown patches flashing in and out of the loose, laying boulders and scattered trees, his legs pumping like pistons as he fought for footing on the tilted descent. His rider was urging him on recklessly, making no attempt to guide him, bent low to the saddle horn with flying rein and a gun in his fist. Crouched as he was twisting about to try and see behind him, where the reason for his hurry suddenly became apparent. A rifle whapped up there in the butte, and the bullet whined past him, smacking upon a rock, and died out in a shrill howl as it keyholed off into space. Another shot, and a third, but for the bounding and dodging pony was a difficult mark as he bolted erratically down the hill. The bullets droned past like vicious whispering insects that sang on a shrill note of disappointment. At each shot the speeding horse seemed to leap ahead even faster, and his rider, abandoning his effort to return the shots fired at him, turned his attention forward. Ahead and to the left was a small canyon, the long dry bed of a creek that had once run down the hill, and with a pressure on his knee, the rider turned his mount towards the ravine, and as another shot hummed overhead, they flashed into the shelter and out of sight. Kittering sent his horse straight down the draw until it emptied out onto the sage flats, and then, without slackening speed, pulled him around to circle the butte at its base. Kittering was enraged. He had been on a pleasant little ride, not bothering anybody, not doing anything, when somebody started shooting, and shooting as though he meant business, too. It was remarkable what a nuisance a man with a gun could make himself. Kittering wanted to find out who it was that had so suddenly developed a grudge against him, find him and talk to him, although from the looks of the heavy revolver in his hand, there might be a reasonable doubt as to how much talking just might be done. The butte was little now quiet. He pulled up, dropping lightly off, and ground reined the pony. Then he began climbing upwards cautiously. He kept his six-shooter in his right hand, and with his left he helped himself along past the small oaks and mesquite trees. Climbing was hard and clumsy work in the high-heeled boots. He was sweating with the heat of the sun and the tension of waiting for a sudden unexpected shot. He kept under cover as much as possible, staying in the shelter of the larger rocks or slipping from trunk to trunk of the trees that grew thinly on the hillside. Near the top, a wild grape vine sprung a leafy screen between trees, and Kettering ran hastily for this shield. He dodged between the nearest trees, and at the same moment heard the slap of the invisible rifle, and immediately the clunk of a bullet striking his tree. Behind the sheltering trunk, he dropped flat to the ground and cursed himself wholeheartedly for not bringing his own rifle. Peering through the grass, and no further movement came from above. The butte seemed to drowse in the sun. A butterfly capered in the wind and air above his head, and from somewhere came the drone of bees. Faintly he heard the whisk of his pony's tail as he chased the flies below. Yet above him, hidden in the innocent green of mesquite and oak, someone with a rifle was determined that he should not enjoy the peaceful solemnness of the day. Someone was making it his business to bother him, was waiting for him to show himself so that he might make the already warm atmosphere a little warmer with lead. Kettering, laying flat on the ground, with a rock boring into his chest, felt it was inconsiderate, to say the least, and he was quite willing to discuss the affair, and he would even be glad to come halfway. So thus he hitched himself forward in the grass, his six-shooter extended before him, while his eyes searched the foliage for a betraying movement. Whack! The rifle spoke again, and he felt a heavy jerk on his hat and the sudden warmth of the sun on his hair. Instinctively he ducked his head and found his mouth filled with grass. For a moment he tried to squeeze into the ground, glaring upward with one eye. The other saw only grass. Then suddenly there it was, a movement behind a rock. As he raised his head again, a figure stepped out into the open, and in one swift movement, like the lunge of a striking rattler, he threw up his gun and fired. With a boom of the .45, the figure on the slope whirled half around, then folded up weakly like a clockwork doll that had run out, and the rifle, glittering in the sun, spun from his hands. A broad-brimmed hat was dislodged and rolled in awkwardly, loping curves down into the hillside. The sun shone with a bronzy gleam on a copper-headed colored hair. Kettering ran awkwardly up the hill in his high-heeled boots. A faint misgiving had seized his mind. What kind of dry gulcher would be fooled by a hat shot off a hiding man's head? There was something funny about this. As he approached the sprawling body, his doubt began to grow. It looked really quite queer. There was something. He caught his breath in a harsh gasp. The copper-colored hair rolled in gleaming waves over the pale oval of a face, spilling in disorderly, shining masses on slender shoulders draped in a puncher's checkered shirt, and Kettering's gun slipped numbly into the holster. With his brain spinning in dazing circles, he dropped onto his knees and turned her over gently. A wide stain was spreading quietly on the gaudy shirt front, and opposite on the back. The bullet had gone clean through her right shoulder. Kettering swore confusedly. He fumbled into his pockets and swore again, then put two fingers in his mouth and whistled shrilly. In a few minutes he heard the scrambling of hooves and the paint pony trotting up to the butte top. His ears pricked inquiringly. "Come here, Patch." He rose from his knees, and went hurriedly to the horse, and from his saddle took a clean bandana. With this he returned to the girl, kneeling beside her again, began to unbutton her shirt, and the horse came up to watch and nudged him curiously. He blushed and fumbled with the buttons. "Get out of here," he said rudely. This here's got to be done." The pony lost interest and fell to cropping the grass back again, while Kittering bound up the shoulder clumsily with the scarf. The bright red of the bandana shone luridly against the white skin, and he hastily rebuttoned her shirt. She was still unconscious. He got up again, unhooked his canteen from the saddle, and tried without success to force some water between her lips. Recalling something, he stood up again and began to search for a horse. She was not wearing riding boots, he had noticed, but a pair of heavy shoes, blue overalls, and that checkered shirt. But it was inconceivable to the cowpuncher that she should be afoot on the plains. To a man who would saddle his horse and ride from the bunkhouse to the ranch house that was only 100 yards away, this was the worst of all calamities. Afoot on the plains. A puncher's high-heeled boots were never made for walking, nor in the desert sun lightly to be trifled with in a region where water was scarce, but rattlers and horned toads and lizards and coyotes were in legions. Kittering followed the girl's tracks back with little difficulty over the top of the butte. He found the place where she had tried to dry gulch him. The empty rifle shells lay about the rock on which she had rested the rifle. From there, the slight traces of her shoes led back over the other side of the butte towards the rolling foothills on the far side of the creek. That was the beginning of Short Hills, and here he found the beginnings of a trail. Satisfied then that the trail would take him where she had come from, he returned to the butte top, walking rapidly but clumsily, rolling his body with a certain weariness as though he expected the earth to heave up like the back of a traveling horse. End of chapter 1.